This is the White Coat Investor Podcast, Milestones to Millionaire, celebrating stories of success along the journey to financial freedom.
This is Milestones to Millionaire Podcast. Family physician lives like a resident. This episode is sponsored by All Global Circle. You have valuable knowledge and can always use a little extra money. The All Global Circle community is set up to provide a clear, easy, and efficient means of communication between the pharmaceutical industry, the research industry, and those professionals who are using new developments and end products on an ongoing daily basis. If All Global Circle can't get you a survey to take within 90 days, they'll pay you a loyalty bonus just for logging in and checking a couple of times per month. By signing up at whitecoatinvestor.com/global, you'll get an extra $50 just for being a member of the WCI community. All right. We've got a family doc on here with a number of milestones that she has accomplished. But stay tuned after the interview. We're going to talk a little bit about inflation. Our guest today on the Milestones to Millionaire podcast is Cassie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us what you do for a living and how far you are out of training and what part of the country you live in.
I'm a family medicine physician. I am nearly 4 years outside of training, and we live in the Midwest.
Okay. And tell us what milestone we're celebrating today.
I have a plethora of milestones. So
I've got this image now of the three amigos, right? Would you say I have a plethora of pinatas?
Lots of people have paid off loans. So that happened in 22 for us. And
Cool.
then in 2021, we put down cash for part of our mortgage. So that felt good. Then something I was really thrilled about was this past year, we maxed out every single tax advantaged account that we could.
That is exciting.
Very proud of.
Okay, you're talking in the plural. There's a we here. Tell us who else is in the family.
We have me and my partner, so Dan, and two
Okay.
children, toddlers,
Okay.
a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and then one on the way.
Okay, so between you and Dan, what's your household income been the last few years since you got out of training?
So during training, it was about 150 combined,
Okay.
and then recently about 350,000 last year.
Okay, so
Yeah.
good income.
Yeah.
Certainly not, what we hear occasionally on this podcast of people that are just killing it, but this is, pretty classic physician household, income. So, all right. Well, you've done all kinds of things. What things should we talk about first? Why don't we start with the loans? You came out of school with how much?
$220,000 in debt, and that was
And
my net worth when we came out.
minus 220,000. When did you get married?
2016.
Okay. So you owed some of this when you got married. What did Dan think about that?
My husband is very debt averse, put
Uh-huh.
himself through school, a tiny bit of help. And so when he heard that we had that much money in debt, wanted to pay it off in the 10-year time. So as soon as we got married, we were putting like $3,000 of our income a month, and
Wow.
just made a commitment, when we first got married.
So how many months after you got out of training did you pay off those student loans?
Calculated that. 31 months. Yeah.
31 months. So about 2.5 years or so. And how'd you do that? I mean, you weren't making that much money. This is a big chunk of your income that was going toward these.
Yep, large commitment to be free of any debt and also free of debt to PSLF timeframe.
Uh-huh.
That motivated us to put everything towards the loans during training. And then after training, we rented an apartment and didn't buy anything big. And so had a lot of money to go, just slam it towards loans.
So, a lot of people always say, oh, you should carry your loans and use the money to invest. You're borrowing at whatever rate and hopefully earning at a higher rate. You guys decided not to do that. Why was that?
Ignorance is bliss. So our financial awakening occurred 2021.
Okay.
And we were very financial peace, debt snowball, kill the debt. Part of our financial advice was coming from my parents' financial advisor, who was a whole life insurance salesman masquerading as a financial advisor.
Huh,
So those part all of that together told us to
huh.
just do loans first.
So did you manage to avoid buying a whole life policy, or did you end up with one?
Avoided. We were too
Oh, awesome.
poor. He had given us some great advice when we first got married, and we kept coming back to him, still in debt. And
That didn't stop my good friend that sold me one during medical school. The fact that I had no money,
oh,
it didn't bother him at all when he sold me a whole life policy.
yeah, we kept coming, hitting the next step, and he'd say, "Well, no, not yet," or "Wait, once you have $25,000, talk to me." And then we just
Yeah,
something didn't feel right.
yeah, exactly. All right. So how did it feel when you paid off that last loan payment?
Uh, Relieving and daunting because the retirement piece had been there, but not as full. Certainly freeing my husband, he cut back from full-time FTE to point 0.9 as a pharmacist, which doesn't sound
Okay.
like a lot, but between their night shifts and day shifts, it bought us a couple extra days at home together. Great.
Yeah. Wow. So that's a good demonstration that it doesn't take complete financial independence before getting your financial ducks in a row starts making significant improvements in your life. And that's a good example of how it can happen relatively early. All right. Well, how about this down payment? When did you save that up? While you were paying off the loans or after you finished off the loans? When did you save up the down payment?
Down payment was saved during loans and bought a house that was well within our means. It's about 1,400 square foot in the Midwest, and it does the job. It's not a doctor house, or what one would consider a doctor house, but it's a lovely house.
And is your plan to stay there? Is your plan that this is kind of a starter house and maybe you swap into the doctor house at some point, or what's your plan as far as housing going forward?
We're open. We live close to family that have nice big homes that cost less than our current home, so we just visit family. It counts.
Does your family, you've obviously, at least the last couple of years, put a pretty good focus on becoming financially stable, getting business taken care of here relatively early in your career. Has anybody in your family given you a hard time? Like, why aren't you living like a doctor now that you're making the big bucks?
Interestingly, they've been really proud of us. I would say my parents kicked out their whole life insurance salesman guy right about when we were having our financial awakening. So, like, my dad was paying off his credit cards while we were paying down loans. So it was kind of like, good job, high fives, you know?
So you're all doing it together. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So this year you maxed out your retirement accounts for the first time. Tell us all the accounts you maxed out.
Got the 403Bs, opened up a 457 non governmental, maxed out the HSA finally, and convinced my husband to read your post on the backdoor Roth, which was he does all our taxes on TurboTax and he didn't want to mess that up. And I was like, I promise you it's foolproof. Read this. Um, and then, opened up the kids' 529s with birthday money they were getting.
Okay.
And then this year, opened up a money market fund for a potential taxable account. So
Okay. Cool. It's exciting. You're playing this rich person game, investing.
that kind of surreal when all you thought you're just supposed to pay loans, the debt snowball. And you're like, oh, there's another
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, a whole other world out there.
Yeah.
Well, this is awesome. You guys have done fantastic. As far as paying off the loans, did you find it to be harder or easier than you thought it was going to be at the beginning?
Mm, really easier in terms of keeping the lifestyle the same. Harder when it came to actually clicking the button. But like nothing changed. We were still making our meals and going on family vacations, and it was just seeing the number and clicking it, or seeing the account and opening it and being all right with that change.
So you did a few things to kind of not only increase your income, but also to, make sure that you had your own wellness being taken care of, primarily through negotiation during the last few years. Tell us about some of the things you were able to negotiate with your contracts that made a difference in your life.
Yeah. So I navigated in COVID times. They needed extra help in the ICU, and I was fresh out of training. So all of a sudden, I found myself in the ICU from the outpatient clinic, but still with an outpatient in basket doing end of life discussions all the meanwhile and helping with codes. So in over my head, working more than my point 0.8 FTE contract, I reached out to my manager and said, "Hey, can you guys comp me for full time for the time that I was in the ICU?" And they agreed to comp me. So I was able to negotiate a bonus during that time. And
Cool.
then
Nice work.
another negotiation was able to make last year on return from maternity leave on a contract between balanced with productivity of RVUs and patient facing hours. I was in the 90th percentile for RVUs, dying, taking notes home 2 hours every night. And so I reached out starting in February with SOS emails, then a formal sit down with my medical director, who, when she found out it was taking me like a month to get results back to patients, she said, "No, we're going to pause." She went up to bat for me. She said, "This is how you do point 0.8 FTE." And then we negotiated that I would work more on productivity rather than needing to increase patient facing hours, which I know a lot of docs get a lot of pushback from their managers, but just being persistent and finding people that'll be in your corner um, to help you balance life and salary.
Yeah. And a lot of times when you start into those negotiations, you realize that you are the limited commodity. You are the valuable commodity. And sometimes they don't make you feel that way when you're negotiating, but it's true. If you're willing to play a little bit of hardball and start talking about leaving, it's amazing what concessions you can get sometimes.
Most certainly. So definitely negotiate, network, and stick up for yourself, your family.
Cool. Good tips. Well, let's say there's somebody out there that's like you were a few years ago, maybe not so financially literate, hasn't yet had this financial awakening. What advice do you have for that person?
Certainly take a deep breath. It's okay to find information later and to just persevere. Don't feel paralyzed by what you don't know or might not know, because as healthcare professionals, we diagnose and treat and give plans all the time. It's not that much different. So kind of seeing yourself like your own patient and looking up what to do, your website, your book. I love your boot camp book. It's very algorithmic. So I'll share that with friends and family. It's a low financial commitment on their part. And so I think that's a really nice, easy step just to go box by box and keep
Yeah,
going
that's
through it.
definitely the way it was written. That was the whole point, was to give it to people that just need to be told what to do. So awesome. I like your idea of it's not all that different from a treatment plan. Physician, heal thyself, heal thy finances, right? Very cool. Awesome. Well, it has been wonderful to have you on. Congratulations on your success. I mean, this
Thanks.
is like the perfect, live like a resident example. I tell people to do it all the time. They'll be able to pay off their student loans and save up a down payment and max out their retirement accounts. And you have shown that indeed it works if you actually do it. So,
Thanks.
congratulations and thank you for coming on to inspire others to do the same.
Thanks.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. It demonstrates a lot of things, but mostly it demonstrates that this actually works. If you actually, keep living about like you did during training for a little while after you finish, you can save up a down payment and pay off your student loans and max out your retirement accounts. You can do it all. You don't have to choose between them. As long as you don't let your spending, your lifestyle grow just as quickly as your income does. It's all about the difference between those two. And there's no better time than the very beginning to really make that difference large. All right, as I promised you at the beginning of this episode, I want to talk a little bit about inflation. Inflation, it's been in the news a lot the last few years, but honestly, it's something that investors ought to be thinking about all the time. Neurologist and financial guru Bill Bernstein talks about the four deep risks when it comes to your finances. And these are inflation, deflation, confiscation, and devastation. Deflation's like the Great Depression, right? Confiscation is like when Russia came in, became communist, and took everything. Devastation is like World War II, when every city in Germany had the snot bombed out of it, right? But of all these deep risks, the most common one to show up in world financial history is inflation. It's pretty common, happens all the time, both just kind of regular high inflation like we've had the last year or two, as well as Zimbabwean style hyperinflation. And so inflation is something you want to be thinking about a lot when it comes to portfolio design and when it comes to everything. In fact, you should get used to thinking in terms of real. And when I say real, what that means is after inflation, numbers and figures. Okay. So when you're thinking, I need this much money, to retire on in a few years, you need to be thinking about that in terms of, today's dollars. I need $3 million in 2023 dollars is what I need. Now, by the time you get to that point, that's going to be more than $3 million. Maybe it's 3.6, maybe it's 4.2, whatever, right? But the point is, you got to get used to thinking in terms of after inflation numbers. Same thing when you're thinking about your investment returns. It's wonderful. You made 9% this year. But if inflation was 4%, you really only made 5%. Now, I wish the IRS would think this way. They do not. They make you pay taxes on that inflation. And that's an unfortunate thing about our tax system, such as it is. But you need to learn to think in terms of inflation-adjusted numbers with everything, whether that's returns, assets, etc. My favorite place to go for inflation data is a website called inflationdata.com. And the nice thing about it is as soon as the federal government comes out with its inflation figures, they're published here. And you can look back historically at what inflation has been. And you can also look at the current inflation data. The one you see in the news most of the time is the year-over-year inflation figure. And, the current inflation rate is what they often call it. And as I record this on June 16th, 2023, that rate is 4.05%. So over the last 12 months, in general, as measured by the government using their consumer price index for urban consumers, prices have gone up 4.05% over the last 12 months. And that's a lot better than it's been for the last couple of years. I mean, inflation peaked, from all the liquidity and low interest rates that have been going on with our economy to try to save it from the COVID pandemic. They probably overshot the mark, obviously, in retrospect. That peaked at over 9%. And you can see that when you look at this, current inflation table that they have there. If you go back, you can see, in June of 2022, it hit 9.06%. That's over the prior 12 months. If you go back to 2020, you can see at one point, that rate was almost 0%. In May of 2020, the prior year's inflation was basically flat. There was no inflation. And then from that point on, it climbed and climbed and climbed. By the end of 2020, it was 1.36%. By the end of 2021, it was 7.04%. And then it peaked in June of 2022 at 9.06%. By the end of 2022, it was down to 6.45%. And with the most recent data, it's 4.05%. Historically, inflation has been about 3% over the decades. Obviously, sometimes it's higher, like it has been the last couple of years, and sometimes it's lower than that 3%. You should be aware that the Fed's part of their mandate is to keep inflation under control. And they are actually aiming for about 2% inflation. That's where they've decided, the economy seems to grow best at about 2%. That number is actually kind of just pulled out of random air. It's really all about the expectation. That probably could have been set at 1% or 2.5% or whatever. But the point is to have people expect something and then deliver that. That's what seems to allow the economy to grow. The economy doesn't like uncertainty. And so that's what you ought to expect. That's what the Fed's trying to do. They have pretty good tools to keep this under control in the long run. And you ought to expect them to use them. And that's why when inflation got out of control, boy, you started seeing them hiking interest rates like crazy. I think for 3 months in a row, it went up 0.75 of a point, their short-term interest rates, and they started reining in all the liquidity they'd been pumping into the system. More interesting chart on this inflationdata.com site, and they've got some cool calculators there too. But my favorite chart is under a tab, they call it the monthly inflation data. And rather than summing everything over the prior year, this actually tells you what it was over the prior month. And if you look back, you can see that, of course, inflation is going to be lower now than it was a year ago because there's actually been negative inflation for 4 of the last 12 months. Last July and August and November and December, it was actually negative. We had deflation, not just disinflation, which is a lower rate of inflation, but deflation for 4 of the last 12 months. And then you can also see, it's also interesting to see the pattern that inflation is generally higher in the first few months of the year. January, February, March is when people tend to raise prices and get raises at work. And so inflation's often higher in the first few months of the year than it is later in the year. But it's very interesting to look at that month-to-month data as well. And, that was very reassuring last year, even though the one being published was really high, to look and see that going month to month, inflation has already been coming down quite a bit. So that's good. Inflation is bad for investors. It is not a good thing. It makes your money that you have worth less. And so getting this back down to a low rate is important to keep the economy growing and to keep your nest egg growing. But my point is, start learning to think in after inflation terms. Our sponsor for this episode is All Global Circle. You have valuable knowledge and can always use a little extra money. The All Global Circle community is set up to provide a clear, easy, and efficient means of communication between the pharmaceutical and research industries, those professionals who are using new developments and end products on an ongoing daily basis. That's you. If All Global Circle can't get you a survey to take within 90 days, they'll pay you a loyalty bonus just for logging in and checking a couple of times per month. By signing up at whitecoatinvestor.com/global, you'll get an extra $50 just for being a member of the WCI community. All right, thanks for being with us for another episode of the Milestone to Millionaire podcast. Our regular White Coat Investor podcast will drop in 3 more days. Those drop on Thursdays. These drop on Mondays. I hope you enjoy the variety between them. We appreciate your contributions to the podcast. This really is a community. We really want to provide the content that you're looking for and have your participation. If you would like to share the milestone you've accomplished most recently, we'd like to bring you on. whitecoatinvestor.com/milestones is where you apply, and we will take your experience and use it to inspire others to do the same. In the meantime, please, thanks for what you do. Be optimistic. You can do this. We're here to help. So keep your head up and your shoulders back. We'll see you next time on the podcast.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.